This is a rare Ethiopian Orthodox Bible manuscript, handwritten in Ethiopia's sacred liturgical language, Ge'ez.
The bells of Aksum have tolled for centuries, guarding secrets that the Western world assumed were lost to the desert sands. But when a small group of Ethiopian monks finally released the long-suppressed resurrection passage from a 4th century Ge'ez manuscript, the foundation of global theology shifted overnight. This wasn't just a linguistic find, it was a total subversion of the Easter story. What they translated doesn't just supplement the Bible, it dismantles the very nature of the miracle, the discovery at Debra Dammo. One must first understand that Ethiopia is not merely a country, but a 1.1 million square kilometre time capsule to understand why this discovery changes everything. While the Library of Alexandria burned and the Roman Empire fractured, the Ethiopian highlands remained a fortress for the written word. This is the land that preserved the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees in their only complete forms, while the rest of Christendom allowed them to wither into fragments. The resurrection passage, catalogued by local scribes as fragment 27b, was recovered from the monastery of Debra Dammo, an architectural marvel dating back to the Aksumite era. This sanctuary is famously accessible only by scaling a vertical cliff face via a 50-foot goat hair rope, a physical barrier that has served as a biological and political firewall for over 1,500 years. For decades, the existence of this specific parchment was a rumor whispered among scholars of the Garima Gospels. The Garima manuscripts themselves, carbon dated to between 390 and 660 AD, proved that Ethiopia possessed the world's oldest illustrated Christian texts, predating European illuminated manuscripts by centuries. However, fragment 27b was kept in a taboo-like sacredness, hidden from the prying eyes of colonial-era archaeologists and modern carbon dating teams alike. The monks of the north traditionally viewed the Western obsession with verifying the Word of God as a spiritual failing. It was only through a rare consensus of the monastic elders, prompted by a series of perceived spiritual omens, that the decree was made to share the translation with the wider world. The text is written in Ge'ez, the ancient South Semitic language that predates the modern Amharic and Tigrinya tongues. Ge'ez is a linguistic bridge. It contains nuances of meaning that are often lost in the transition from the original Koine Greek or Aramaic into Latin and English. In the Ge'ez tradition, words are not merely symbols for objects, but kene, riddles that contain layers of divine truth. When the translation was finally authorized, it revealed a narrative that deviates sharply from the physical, flesh and bone resurrection taught in Western cathedrals. Unlike the 4 canonical accounts, which were standardized under the oversight of various imperial councils, this passage represents a pre-Nicene perspective. It offers a raw, unedited glimpse into how the earliest African Christians understood the transition from death to life. The discovery has sent shockwaves through the academic community, not just because of its age, but because of its provenance. Ethiopia's Miaphysite tradition has long held a more mystical view of Christ's nature, one where the divine and human are perfectly unified. This manuscript provides the textual evidence for that theology, suggesting that the resurrection was never intended to be understood as a biological resuscitation, but as a cosmic event that altered the fabric of reality itself. But the true shock wasn't in the age of the ink. It was in the ink's message. The alternative resurrection, what the text says. The translation of fragment 27b does not begin with a rolling stone or a panicked discovery by the Magdalene. Instead, it opens with a startlingly different focus, the internal state of the witnesses and the immediate transformation of the atmosphere surrounding the tomb. While the Gospels of Matthew and Luke emphasize the physicality of the risen Christ, his ability to be touched, his consumption of honeycomb, the visibility of his wounds, the Ethiopian resurrection passage describes a phenomenon that borders on the transdimensional. In this Ge'ez account, The body of the Nazarene is not raised in the sense of a corpse coming back to life. Rather, it is absorbed into a state of pure living light. The text uses a specific Ge'ez term, Berhanawi, which translates roughly to luminous entity, but carries a deeper connotation of a light that possesses its own intelligence. According to the translation, when the women approached the tomb, they did not find a young man in white or a pair of angels. They found a vortex of stillness. The passage states, "The earth did not shake with the weight of his feet, for his feet were no longer of the earth. He stood before them as a pillar of dawn, and when he spoke, the sound did not come from his throat, but from the marrow of their own bones." This shift in sensory detail changes everything, because it moves the resurrection away from a biological miracle, which modern science struggles to reconcile, and toward a metaphysical evolution. In the canonical tradition, the resurrection is a proof of power over death. In fragment 27b, the resurrection is a demonstration of the unreality of death. The text records a long-lost dialogue between the luminous entity and Mary Magdalene. When she reaches out to touch him, the text does not say, "Do not cling to me," as in the Greek me mau haptu. Instead, it says, "Do not seek the shadow of the man you knew, for the shadow has returned to the sun. Look instead at your own hands, for they now glow with the same fire." This implies a universal resurrection, the idea that the event at the tomb was a spark that ignited a change in all of humanity simultaneously. It suggests that the Christ light was not a localized event, but a broadcast. For theologians, this is a radical departure. If the resurrection was a frequency shift rather than a physical resuscitation, the last 2,000 years of body-centric theology, the obsession with relics, the physical shroud, and the literal return of a fleshly king must be re-evaluated. Furthermore, the passage describes the 3 days in the tomb not as a harrowing of hell, where Jesus liberates souls from a subterranean prison, but as a reweaving of the world soul. The Ge'ez verbs used here describe a process of mending a torn garment. The text suggests that death had created a tear in the fabric of creation, and the 3 days were required for the divine consciousness to stitch the material and spiritual realms back together. This explains why the luminous entity was unrecognizable at first. He was no longer a singular person, but the thread itself. The linguistic precision of the Ethiopian monks in translating this section has been exhaustive. They point out that the Western world's reliance on Latin translations led to a heavy interpretation of the resurrection, one rooted in legalism, debt, and physical sacrifice. The Ge'ez text, however, is light. It uses metaphors of evaporation, singing, and the rising of incense. It portrays a Jesus who does not just overcome death, but reveals that death is an optical illusion created by a lack of spiritual sight. When the monks reached the final lines of the fragment, they found a command that was notably absent from the New Testament. "Tell the brothers not to wait for my return in the clouds, for I have already returned in the breath of every living thing." This single sentence effectively dismantles the concept of the Second Coming as a future historical event, placing the kingdom squarely in the present moment of the believer's existence. But as the spiritual implications settled, a different kind of storm was gathering in the halls of power. The Vatican's response and the academic firestorm, the release of the resurrection passage, did not merely ripple through the halls of academia. It struck the institutional church like a seismic event. Within 48 hours of the translation's publication by the Institute of Ethiopian Studies in Addis Ababa, the Holy See issued a cautious 3-page statement from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. The tone was one of diplomatic skepticism. While acknowledging the historical significance of the Ethiopian Tewahedo Church's manuscript tradition, the Vatican warned against extrapolating theological dogma from isolated fragments that lack the consensus of the early ecumenical councils. To the Roman hierarchy, fragment 27b was a dangerous echo of Docetism. an early Christian heresy which claimed that Christ's body was only an illusion and his sufferings were not real. However, for modern scholars, the Vatican's defensiveness was the ultimate validation. Dr. Elena Moretti, a leading papyrologist at Oxford, argued that the Roman response was a predictable attempt at narrative border control. If the resurrection was a metaphysical shift in consciousness rather than a physical resuscitation of a corpse, then the entire structure of the apostolic succession and the physical authority of the Church might be called into question. Rome's authority is built on the literal physical keys given to a literal physical Peter by a literal physical Jesus, Moretti noted during a televised symposium. This Ge'ez text proposes a Christ who is a universal frequency, accessible without a middleman. That is a terrifying prospect for any centralized bureaucracy. The academic firestorm spread rapidly to the United States and Germany, where Search for the Historical Jesus scholars began comparing fragment 27b to the Nag Hammadi library discovered in Egypt in 1945. For years, the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Philip had hinted at a light-based resurrection, but those texts were often dismissed as Gnostic fantasies written long after the fact. The Ethiopian manuscript was different, because it was found in the context of an unbroken, living monastic tradition, and because its Ge'ez syntax suggested an extremely early Semitic source, it could not be so easily dismissed as a fringe invention. It was, as one Harvard historian put it, the first time we've seen the other side of the Easter story preserved with such institutional integrity. In the digital sphere, the resurrection passage went viral, sparking a global debate between traditionalists and evolutionary Christians. On social media, hashtags like #resurrection of light trended as people grappled with the idea of a Jesus who didn't leave, but diffused. The debate wasn't just about theology, it was about the nature of reality. Physicists were even drawn into the fray, pointing out that the Ge'ez description of a vortex of stillness and a pillar of dawn sounded remarkably like modern descriptions of quantum field theory, where particles are not solid objects but excitations in a field. The pressure on the Ethiopian Orthodox Church became immense. Western museums offered millions for the physical manuscript, while conservative factions within the global Orthodox community urged the monks of Debra Dammo to recant the translation. Yet the monks remained unmoved, stating simply that they were not releasing a new truth, but merely unveiling one that had been breathing in the dark for 17 centuries. The firestorm proved one thing. The world was no longer satisfied with a miracle that obeyed the laws of a Sunday school textbook. They wanted a miracle that challenged the limits of existence itself. Yet, to understand how this text survived the fires of history, one must look at the unique soil from which it grew. The Ge'ez connection. Why Ethiopia kept the secret. The survival of fragment 27b is not an accident of geography, but a testament to the unique theological fortress that is the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. While the rest of the Mediterranean world was subject to the sweeping edicts of Byzantine emperors and the Roman papacy, who often sought to homogenize Christian thought for the sake of imperial stability, Ethiopia remained a sovereign spiritual island. The Ge'ez language itself acted as a linguistic barrier, a sacred cipher that protected these early Christian insights from being corrected by Latin-speaking censors who viewed any deviation from the physical resurrection as a threat to the social order. Central to this preservation is the concept of Tewahedo, a Ge'ez word meaning being made one. Unlike the Western Church, which separated the humanity and divinity of Christ into two distinct natures, Diophysitism, the Ethiopian tradition holds that the divine and human were perfectly unified in a single nature. This Miaphysite worldview provided the perfect intellectual soil for the resurrection of radiance described in the new manuscript. To a monk in 4th century Aksum, it was not scandalous to suggest that Christ's body became light. It was the logical conclusion of a God who had become fully unified with the material world. Historians are now beginning to realize that Ethiopia served as a global backup drive for the early church. When the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD created a massive schism, many of the more mystical, unfiltered texts were branded as apocryphal and destroyed in the Roman territories. However, those texts flowed south, following the Nile into the kingdom of Aksum. Because the Ethiopian Church was never under the political thumb of Rome or Constantinople, it felt no obligation to burn the resurrection passage. Instead, they bound it in goatskin, hid it in the high-altitude humidity of monastery storehouses, and treated it as a profound mystery rather than a heresy. This preservation extends beyond fragment 27b. To ground this discovery in fact, one must look at the Book of Enoch. For over 1,000 years, the Western world knew of Enoch only through a single mention in the Epistle of Jude. It was considered lost until Scottish explorer James Bruce rediscovered the complete text in Ethiopia in 1773. The Ethiopian monks hadn't found it, they had simply never lost it. They had been reading it, copying it, and praying with it for 16 centuries. The release of the resurrection passage follows this exact pattern. The monks didn't see themselves as releasing a new document, but as opening a window that the rest of the world had shuttered during the Middle Ages. The role of the Nibuer-Ed, the high priest of Aksum, and the monastic scribes was to act as the guardians of the ink. In the scriptoriums of Lalibela and Lake Tana, the act of copying a manuscript is a liturgical rite. Every character of the Ge'ez alphabet, the only indigenous African alphabet still in widespread use, is believed to carry a specific spiritual vibration. By maintaining the resurrection passage in its original linguistic form, the monks preserved the specific frequency of the early African church's understanding of Christ. They kept the secret not out of a desire for exclusion, but out of a profound sense of stewardship. They waited for a time when they felt the global consciousness was mature enough to move beyond a flesh-only theology and embrace a more cosmic, luminous understanding of the soul's potential. This stewardship has now reached its climax, forcing a final reckoning with the meaning of the miracle itself. A new foundation for faith. The unveiling of the Ethiopian resurrection passage marks the end of an era of theological certainty and the beginning of a much more profound inquiry into the nature of human potential. For 2 millennia, the Western world viewed the resurrection as a singular historical anomaly, a one-time suspension of the laws of physics that served to validate a specific religious institution. Fragment 27b suggests something far more radical, that the resurrection was not an exception to the rule of nature, but the ultimate reveal of what nature actually is. By shifting the focus from the resuscitation of a corpse to the resurrection of radiance, the text invites humanity to view itself not as a collection of biological accidents, but as luminous entities currently experiencing the shadow of the material world. This discovery provides a new foundation for faith that is remarkably resilient in the face of modern scientific understanding. While a physical body rising from the dead remains a point of intense friction between faith and biology, the concept of consciousness evolving into a light-based state aligns with contemporary explorations in quantum physics and the study of non-local consciousness. The Ethiopian monks have effectively bridged a gap that has haunted the human psyche since the Enlightenment, the divide between the spirit and the atom. In the Ge'ez worldview, there is no divide. The atom is simply the spirit slowed down to the point of visibility. Furthermore, the universal resurrection, hinted at in the final lines of the manuscript, offers a path toward global healing that transcends denominational lines. If the Christ light is truly a broadcast present in the breath of every living thing, as the text claims, then the artificial barriers of religion, race, and geography become secondary to a shared ontological reality. The Great Commission of the Church, in this light, is no longer about converting others to a specific historical narrative. but about helping others recognize the fire in their own hands. It turns the spiritual life from a quest for salvation into a journey of recognition. As we look toward the future, the impact of Fragment 27b will likely be measured not in the number of converts it generates, but in the way it subtly alters the vibration of human hope. It suggests that death is not a wall, but a thinning of the veil, a transition into a vortex of stillness where the individual is woven back into the world soul. The monks of Debra Dammo, standing on their high cliffs, have given the world a gift of perspective. They have reminded us that while the Western world was busy building empires of stone and steel, the keepers of the Ge'ez tradition were guarding a treasure of light. The bells of Aksum continue to toll, but they sound different now. They no longer ring to keep secrets in. They ring to invite the world to look closer at the dawn. The resurrection passage has changed everything because it has reminded us that the most important miracles are not those that happened in the past, but those that are currently breathing within us. The light of Aksum now reaches every corner of the globe. Stay tuned for our next deep dive into the world's hidden histories. Click subscribe and leave your comments below.